Well, we're out here on a bit of an explore today. We're going to go back to an old abandoned fire tower. Um, this is an area that is on the edge of the boundary waters, but it's not in the boundary waters. Um, it was one of a series of fire towers that were built many years ago. We'll talk about that a little bit on the way in. This is a spot where I've come into that I've been able to drive to recently. When I first came here in the late 70s, we could drive all the way up to where the fire tower was, but the trail is encroaching in and won't be long and there will be not much of a trail at all. The bugs have been unbelievably bad this year. Both the black flies, the mosquitoes haven't been too bad yet, but they'll be coming. The black flies and the ticks have been just incredibly bad. So I sprayed my clothes down with permethrin. You can see the black flies buzzing around my head. I'm going to be putting on some DEET on my hat and my neck. Ugh, not down my throat. I do have a bug shirt along. Hopefully I won't have to use that, but it's there just in case. Ready to go. The place we're hiking to today is called Jackpine Mountain. This is, as I said, one of a series of fire towers that were built anywhere from the early 1920s until the 1930s. There was a series of forest fires in 1918, 1919 that caused some real bad fires all across Minnesota, and particularly in this area, which had been recently logged. There was a lot of dry material around that if a fire got started up here, it would cause a real problem. So they started to build fire towers up here on any of the higher pieces of elevation they could find. And originally they were primitive. They were built out of wood and they got some stuff up, but eventually they came back again primarily in the 1930s and built steel structures that lasted some until today. Many of them were taken down in the 1960s, but there are still some on the edge around the Spear National Forest and the Chippewa National Forest today. As we go further and further hiking up the mountain here, we're going to see that this trail diminishes as we go along, which is typical of what happened with the trails back to many of the other fire towers. Eventually, the Forest Service did open up, or allowed to be open up, some trails to some of the fire towers, such as near Angleworm Lake, where the Angleworm Fire Tower was, the fire tower on the Sioux River, the Kekacobic Trail. Again, those are some pretty major hikes to get into there. Some were just hiking trails. Some, like the Angleworm Trail, actually had a logging railroad that came almost right up to it. So there was more than one way of entry. Many of the trails these days are either just mere footpaths or actually disappeared altogether. Most of these towers were put up between 80 and 100 feet high. From the tallest points that they could find to put them on, such as Jackpine Mountain, you could get quite a view from in 360 degrees around the area. What a lot of people don't realize is that after this was cut years and years and years ago, anywhere from the late 1800s until the 1930s, 1940s, and even in some places up until the 1960s, much of it was replanted. And the red pine in particular that you see now was actually planted, and you can see these along where this old trail is were actually planted in rows. If you go up to some places on Basswood, particularly around Washington Island, Skidway, where Hubachicks used to be, near Hoist Bay, you'll find if you get in the right position, you can see row after row after row of planted trees. Now, this is as close to wilderness as we're going to get, and I give it credit for that. It's beautiful up here. It's great. It's a great resource, but it wasn't always like this. And consequently, there are lots of evidence of what used to take place here even after the loggers came in and logged it. And trees planted in rows is one of it. If you look real closely here, you can see there's a row of trees, there's a row of trees, and here's a row of trees. All indicative of the efforts that were put in to reforest this after the logging days. Now, these trees, I would guess, are probably in the neighborhood of 60 to 70, older than that. I would say they're probably 80 to 90 years old. They're well away from being mature yet. They aren't the 300-year-old virgin pines that we come across once in a while, but they're getting there. They've been here for a long time and doing really well. Getting to where the tower actually was. This is the corner right here on top of Jackpine Mountain. Years ago, when I would come up here, the brush on this side was down quite a bit, and there was a panorama that you could see from this because it drops off sharply on this corner. It's pretty flat behind where the camera is set up there. That's where the old cabin and some of the other stuff used to be, but you used to come up here and you didn't need to get any elevation in order to see the countryside, but it's grown up quite a bit. This is the end of the trail. If you can find the trail that comes into here, it will bring you to this, and this is where you'll end up, and it stops. A lot of these fire towers were dismantled in the 1960s into the 1970s with a combined effort of the Forest Service and the Minnesota DNR. They went a different direction as far as watching for fires. It was a lot more efficient in order to have an airplane go up with a spotter. And they could go up during peak fire season, spend a few hours in the air each day, and cover hundreds of square miles, and with one airplane and 2 personnel, a pilot and a spotter. And so consequently, when that became the primary way that the Forest Service and the DNR looked for fires, then these were no longer necessary. A lot of them were taken down. There are still a few standing. I don't know of any in Minnesota that are manned at this point, but there are some that are standing. There are some that you can still climb with permission. So there's still some around. There are some organizations around the U.S., one in particular with chapters in Minnesota, that historically document and write stories and try to visit some of these old fire towers. I'm hoping to get to at least a couple more this summer. I also am part of a group called Boundary Waters Heritage Trails, and one of the things that we're trying to do is to historically document some of the old logging roads and trails back to these fire towers, with the idea of, hey, people are interested in the history of the area, and maybe they'd like to explore a little bit and see what they can find out here. So days like this are a real joy. I bring the camera gear out and a little lunch, and it's a very nice way to spend a day out in the Northwoods. So hope you enjoyed this little documentary, and we'll sign off for now.